If your own child looked you in the eyes and said, "I wish you were my dad," would you fight to stay, or would you walk away so they can live with the choice they just made? My name is David Mitchell, and I'm 43 years old. I design commercial buildings for a living. Strip malls, office complexes, the kind of structures that dot suburban America like concrete acne. It's not glamorous work, but it pays well enough to afford a nice house in Millbrook Heights, a decent car, and the kind of middle-class life that used to mean something. On the morning of March 15th, my birthday, I expected the usual routine. Coffee, toast, maybe a card from my wife Maggie and our 19-year-old daughter Sydney. What I got instead was a text message that would detonate my entire existence. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through emails on my phone, when it buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The preview showed only, "You deserve to know." Attached was a video file. I almost deleted it. Could have been spam, could have been a virus. But something made me tap it open. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fate being a vindictive bastard. The video was 37 seconds long. 37 seconds that felt like watching a slow-motion car crash where you're the one behind the wheel. It showed my wife Maggie in our bedroom, our bed, the one we'd bought together 5 years ago, with a man I recognized immediately. Brett Hoffman, her ex-boyfriend from college. The same Brett she'd assured me was ancient history when we ran into him at a restaurant 6 months ago. They weren't just talking. I watched it once, my coffee growing cold in my hands. Then I watched it again, because sometimes your brain needs confirmation that yes, your life really is imploding. The timestamp showed it was recorded 2 days ago, Tuesday afternoon, when I was at the office designing a new strip mall in Fairfax. My hands were surprisingly steady as I set the phone down. No shaking, no dramatic throwing of objects. Just a strange, hollow calm, like the eye of a hurricane. "Morning, honey," Maggie said, breezing into the kitchen in her navy blue power suit. She worked as a paralegal at Brennan & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the area. At 41, she was still beautiful. Auburn hair always perfectly styled, makeup flawless even at 7 a.m. She kissed my cheek without really looking at me, already checking her own phone for messages. "Happy birthday, by the way," she added, distracted. "Sorry, crazy day ahead. The Patterson case is going to trial next week and I'm drowning in depositions." I studied her face, looking for signs of guilt, deception, anything that might indicate she knew what I'd just seen. But Maggie had always been good at compartmentalizing. It was one of the things that made her excellent at her job. "Thanks," I said. My voice sounded normal, which surprised me. "Any special plans for tonight?" She paused, finally looking at me directly. For a moment, something flickered across her features. Was it guilt? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. "Actually, I might be late. This case?" "Right, the Patterson case." I nodded, taking a sip of cold coffee. "Don't worry about it." Sydney wandered in then, still in her pajamas despite it being past 7. She was home for spring break from Virginia Tech, where she was majoring in communications with a minor in social media influence, or whatever they called it these days. She had Maggie's auburn hair and my stubborn chin, though she'd inherited her mother's talent for making me feel like an outsider in my own home. "Morning, Dad," she said, not looking up from her phone. She grabbed a granola bar from the pantry and headed for the door. "I'm going out with friends today. Don't wait up." "It's my birthday," I said. She paused, hand on the doorknob, and turned back with an expression of mild surprise, as if she'd forgotten I existed at all. "Oh, right. Happy birthday." She glanced at Maggie, who was also heading for the door. "Are we doing dinner or something?" "Your father understands I have work," Maggie said, slinging her purse over her shoulder. "Maybe this weekend?" And then they were both gone, leaving me alone with my cold coffee and the video that was still playing on loop in my head. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the last 22 years of my life. Maggie and I had met in college, though we'd run in different circles. She was pre-law, ambitious, always perfectly put together. I was studying architecture, more comfortable with blueprints than people. Somehow we'd found each other at a party junior year, and she'd seemed charmed by my dry sense of humor and my complete lack of pretension. We'd married right after graduation, bought our first house with a loan from her parents, started building what I thought was a solid life together. Sydney came along 3 years later, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. Or at least, I thought it was perfect. Maybe that was the problem. Looking back now, I could see the signs I'd missed. The way Maggie had grown increasingly critical of my work, my clothes, my friends. The way she'd started working later and later, taking business trips that seemed unnecessary. The way she'd begun treating me like an embarrassing relative she had to tolerate at family gatherings. And Sydney. When had she started looking at me like I was a disappointment? When had I become the boring dad who didn't understand her world of Instagram and TikTok and whatever other platforms she lived on? I picked up my phone and watched the video one more time. This time, I noticed details I'd missed before. The way Maggie laughed at something Brett said. The casual intimacy that spoke of familiarity, of an ongoing relationship rather than a one-time mistake. The expensive watch on Brett's wrist. He'd done well for himself since college. I knew that much. He was some kind of investment banker now, lived in a downtown condo that probably cost more than my annual salary. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that I wasn't even surprised. Somewhere deep down, I'd known something was wrong. I'd just been too comfortable, too complacent, too willing to believe that a marriage could coast on autopilot indefinitely. I deleted the video and the message, then went upstairs to shower and get ready for work. In the mirror, I looked the same as always. Brown hair going gray at the temples, lines around my eyes from too many years of squinting at blueprints, the soft middle-aged spread that comes from too many desk lunches and not enough exercise. I looked like exactly what I was, a middle-aged suburban husband who'd let life happen to him instead of taking control. But as I stood there, water running down my face, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Maggie, wasn't going to demand explanations or beg for another chance. I wasn't going to play the role of the betrayed husband having a breakdown. Instead, I was going to do something that would surprise everyone, including myself. I was going to take control of my own story for once. Work that day was a special kind of torture. I sat through meetings about parking lot drainage and building code compliance while the video played on an endless loop in my head. My colleague Janet asked if I was feeling okay. Apparently I looked pale. I told her it was just birthday blues and tried to focus on the shopping center plans spread across my desk. But concentration was impossible. Every time I looked at my phone, I expected another message from the unknown number. Who had sent me that video? And more importantly, why? Was it someone who knew Maggie, who felt guilty about keeping her secret? Or was it something more calculated, more malicious? I left work early, telling my boss I had birthday dinner plans. It wasn't technically a lie. I did have plans. Just not the kind he was imagining. At home, I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes, staring at the house I'd been paying a mortgage on for 15 years. It was a nice house, colonial style, white with black shutters, a small front porch where Maggie used to sit and read on summer evenings. When had she stopped doing that? When had she stopped wanting to spend quiet moments at home? Inside, the house felt different somehow. Not physically. Everything was exactly where it had always been. But knowing what I knew now, it felt contaminated. I found myself looking at our bed with new eyes, wondering how many times Brett had been there, how many lies Maggie had told to cover her tracks. I went to my home office and pulled up our bank statements online. If this had been going on for a while, there might be evidence. Unexplained charges, cash withdrawals, something that would give me a timeline. What I found was worse than I'd expected. Hotel charges going back 4 months, expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together, a charge at Victoria's Secret from last week. I couldn't remember the last time Maggie had bought lingerie, certainly not for my benefit. The front door opened just after 6. I heard Maggie's heels clicking across the hardwood, then Sydney's voice, animated in a way I rarely heard anymore. "He's taking me to that new sushi place downtown," Sydney was saying. "The one that's impossible to get into? He knows the owner." "That's nice, honey," Maggie replied, but her voice sounded strained. I closed the laptop and walked to the living room. Maggie was standing by the window, still in her work clothes, but looking rumpled, tired. Sydney was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone as usual. "How was work?" I asked Maggie. She startled slightly, as if she'd forgotten I lived there. "Fine. Long day. The Patterson case is more complicated than we thought." I nodded, studying her face. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Sydney mentioned dinner plans," I said. "Oh, yeah." Sydney looked up from her phone, suddenly animated. "Brett's taking me out. Mom's friend from college? He's so cool, Dad. He drives a Porsche and he knows everyone in the city. He said he might be able to get me an internship at his firm this summer." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just that Brett was taking my daughter to dinner, but the way she said his name. The admiration in her voice. The casual way she dismissed her own father while praising the man who was sleeping with her mother. "That's generous of him," I managed to say. "He's a really good guy," Sydney continued, oblivious to the tension in the room. "He's been helping Mom with some legal stuff for work, and he's so much more interesting than—" She stopped abruptly, realizing what she'd been about to say. "More interesting than what?" I asked quietly. Sydney flushed, looking between me and Maggie. "I just meant You know, he has stories about traveling and business deals and stuff. It's exciting. Maggie finally spoke up. Sydney, maybe you should get ready for dinner. But Sydney wasn't done. She sat up straighter, and I could see something in her expression that I'd never seen before. Not just teenage rebellion, but genuine disdain. Why can't you be more like him, Dad? She asked. Brett's successful and confident, and he makes people want to be around him. All you do is sit in your office designing strip malls. When's the last time you did anything exciting? When's the last time you made Mom smile the way he does? The room went dead silent. Maggie's face had gone white, and she was staring at Sydney with something approaching horror. Sydney, she whispered. But the damage was done. My 19-year-old daughter had just confirmed what I already knew, that Brett wasn't just sleeping with my wife, he was actively replacing me in my own family. I stood up slowly, feeling strangely calm. You're right, Sydney. I'm not exciting. I don't drive a Porsche or know restaurant owners or have stories about international business deals. I just work every day to pay for this house and your college tuition and your mother's car and everything else that makes your life possible. But you're absolutely right. That's not very exciting. Sydney's face crumpled slightly, as if she was just realizing what she'd said. Dad, I didn't mean... Yes, you did, I said, not unkindly. And that's okay. You're entitled to your opinion. I looked at Maggie, who was standing frozen by the window. Brett's picking Sydney up here? She nodded mutely. Good. I'd like to meet him properly this time. 20 minutes later, a silver Porsche pulled into our driveway. Through the window, I watched Brett Hoffman climb out of the driver's seat, checking his reflection in the side mirror before walking to our front door. He was tall, well-built, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. Everything about him screamed success and confidence. The doorbell rang. Sydney jumped up eagerly, but I was already moving. I'll get it, I said. I opened the door and found myself face to face with the man who'd been sleeping with my wife. Up close, he was even more impressive. Square jaw, perfect teeth, the kind of tan that comes from expensive vacations rather than yard work. David, he said, extending his hand with a smile that belonged on a campaign poster. Great to see you again. Happy birthday, by the way. I shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the expensive watch Sydney had mentioned. Thank you. That's very thoughtful. Sydney, ready? He asked, glancing over my shoulder. Almost. Come in for a minute. I stepped back, gesturing him into my living room. Can I get you something to drink? I'm fine, thanks. He looked around, taking in the modest furnishings, the family photos on the mantel, the general middle-class comfort of our home. I wondered what he was thinking, whether he was comparing it to his downtown condo, whether he was imagining Maggie living in his world instead of mine. Maggie appeared in the doorway, and I watched the subtle exchange of glances between them. Nothing obvious, nothing I could point to as evidence, but the awareness was there, the shared secret. Brett, she said, her voice carefully neutral. You didn't have to come in. David insisted, he replied smoothly. Besides, I wanted to thank him for raising such an incredible daughter. Sydney's told me so much about your family. Sydney bounced down the stairs then, wearing a dress I'd never seen before and more makeup than usual. She looked older, more sophisticated, more like the kind of woman who might fit into Brett's world. Ready, she announced, grabbing her purse. Have fun, I said, kissing her cheek. She tolerated it with the patience of someone humoring a boring relative. As they headed for the door, I heard Sydney say, Maybe next time Mom can come with us. The three of us could make it a regular thing. Brett's response was too quiet for me to hear, but Sydney laughed. A bright, delighted sound I realized I hadn't heard in months. After they left, Maggie and I stood in the living room, not looking at each other. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. I should probably start dinner, she said finally. Don't bother, I replied. I'm not hungry. She nodded, as if this was perfectly reasonable, and headed upstairs. I heard the bedroom door close, then the sound of the shower running. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. It was time to do some research on Brett Hoffman. If he was going to be part of my family's life, I wanted to know exactly who I was dealing with. What I found was impressive, I had to admit. Harvard MBA, successful investment firm, involved in local charities, no criminal record. By all accounts, he was exactly what he appeared to be. Successful, charming, the kind of man who made other men feel inadequate just by existing. But everyone has secrets. Everyone has vulnerabilities. And I had something Brett didn't know I had. Time, motivation, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The next morning, Maggie left early for work without saying goodbye. I found a note on the kitchen counter. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. No mention of my birthday dinner, no apology for the previous evening's disaster, no acknowledgement that anything had changed between us. Maybe that was for the best. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not until I had all the facts. I called in sick to work and spent the morning making phone calls. First to a private investigator I found online, a former police detective named Ray Kowalski, who specialized in matrimonial cases. Then to a divorce attorney, just to understand my options. Finally, to my bank, to get copies of all our financial records for the past year. Ray agreed to meet me that afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. He was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-50s, weathered face, the kind of man who'd seen everything and wasn't surprised by any of it anymore. "How long do you think it's been going on?" he asked after I'd explained the situation. "Based on the bank records, at least 4 months, maybe longer." He nodded, making notes in a small leather notebook. "And your daughter's involved, how?" "She's not involved in the affair, if that's what you mean, but he's clearly cultivating a relationship with her, taking her to expensive dinners, promising internships, making himself indispensable." "Smart," Ray said grimly. "Makes it harder for you to cut him out completely. What do you want from me?" I'd been thinking about that question all morning. Everything. Financial records, phone records, where they meet, how often, who else knows about it. I want a complete picture before I make my next move. "And what's your next move?" That was the question I'd been avoiding. What did I want? Did I want to save my marriage? Did I want revenge? Did I just want out? "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I want to be the one making the choice, not having it made for me." Ray smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. "I like that. Too many people in your situation just react. They don't think strategically." We agreed on his fee and timeline. He'd have preliminary information within a week, a complete report within 2 weeks. It wasn't cheap, but I'd been saving money for years, planning for Sydney's graduate school or a retirement vacation that was looking increasingly unlikely. That evening, I was in my office when I heard Sydney come home. She was on the phone, her voice carrying up the stairs. "It was amazing, Mom. The restaurant was incredible, and Brett introduced me to this woman who runs a marketing firm downtown. She said I could call her about internships." A pause, then laughter. "He's so different from Dad. He actually listens when I talk about my plans. He takes me seriously." Each word was a small knife between my ribs. Not because Sydney preferred Brett. I could understand that. He was charming, successful, everything I wasn't. But because she seemed to take such pleasure in the comparison, in pointing out my inadequacies. When had I lost my daughter's respect? When had I become the boring parent she tolerated rather than the father she admired? The phone conversation ended, and I heard Sydney's footsteps on the stairs. She paused outside my office door. "Dad, can I talk to you for a minute?" I looked up from my computer, where I'd been pretending to work on building plans. "Of course." She came in and sat down across from my desk, looking uncharacteristically serious. For a moment, I saw the little girl she'd been, the one who used to bring me her drawings to hang on my office wall. "I'm sorry about what I said yesterday," she began. "About you being boring and stuff. That was mean." "It's okay," I said. "You were being honest. I appreciate honesty. But it's not okay." She twisted her hands in her lap. "Brett said something last night that made me think. He said that successful people often don't get credit for the foundation work they do, like the boring stuff that makes everything else possible." I raised an eyebrow. "Brett said that?" "Yeah. He said you probably work really hard to take care of our family, and that's not boring. It's responsible. He said I should appreciate that more." Interesting. Brett was defending me to my own daughter. Why would he do that unless he felt guilty about something? "That was thoughtful of him," I said carefully. Sydney nodded, then hesitated. "Dad, can I ask you something? Are you and Mom okay? I mean, you guys seem distant lately." The question caught me off guard. I'd assumed Sydney was too wrapped up in her own world to notice the tension between Maggie and me. "What makes you ask that?" "I don't know. You barely talk to each other anymore. And Mom's been working so much lately, staying out so late. Sometimes I hear her on the phone and she sounds different. Happier, I guess, but not with us." So Sydney had noticed more than I'd given her credit for. She might not know about the affair specifically, but she could sense that something was wrong. "Your mother and I are going through a difficult time," I said finally. "But that's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix it." "Is it because of Brett?" she asked quietly. My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "I mean, is Mom having an affair with him?" The direct question hung in the air between us. I stared at my daughter. this young woman who was apparently more perceptive than either Maggie or I had realized. "What makes you ask that?" I said, neither confirming nor denying. Sydney sighed. "I'm not stupid, Dad. I see the way they look at each other, and Mom's been getting text messages at weird hours, messages that make her smile in a way she never smiles at home. Plus, she's been dressing differently, wearing perfume more often, caring about her appearance in a way that doesn't seem to be for you." I felt a strange mix of pride and sadness. Pride that my daughter was intelligent and observant. Sadness that she'd been forced to grow up this way, watching her parents' marriage disintegrate. "If she is," Sydney continued, "I want you to know that I don't think it's okay. I mean, I like Brett, and he's been really nice to me, but that doesn't make it right." "And if it's true," I asked, "what do you think I should do about it?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "I think you should do whatever makes you happy, Dad. You've spent so many years taking care of everyone else. Maybe it's time to take care of yourself." After Sydney left, I sat in my office thinking about our conversation. My daughter was more mature than I'd given her credit for, and more loyal than her comments the previous day had suggested. Maybe there was hope for our relationship after all. But her question remained, what would make me happy? For 22 years, I'd defined happiness as keeping my family together, providing for them, being the steady, reliable husband and father they could count on. But what if they didn't want steady and reliable? What if they wanted excitement and passion and all the things I'd never been able to provide? My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, my heart raced, thinking it might be another anonymous video. But it was from Ray, the private investigator. "Got some preliminary information? Can you meet tomorrow afternoon?" I typed back, "Yes, same place, same time." Then I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. In less than 24 hours, I'd have concrete proof of what I already knew. The question was, what was I going to do with it? Outside my window, I could see the lights in our neighbors' houses, other families living their lives, dealing with their own problems and secrets and betrayals. How many of them were fighting battles like this one? How many were pretending everything was fine while their worlds fell apart? Tomorrow, I'd start getting answers. And then I'd have to decide what kind of man I wanted to be for the rest of my life. Ray had been thorough. The folder he slid across the coffee shop table was thick with photographs, phone records, financial statements, and a detailed timeline that painted a picture of deception going back 6 months, longer than I'd suspected. "It started in September," he said, keeping his voice low. "They ran into each other at a legal conference downtown. Your wife was there representing her firm. He was there as a guest speaker on investment law. They had drinks afterward, then dinner the next week." I flipped through the photographs, Maggie and Brett entering a hotel together, leaving his condo building, sitting close together at an expensive restaurant I'd never heard of. In every image, they looked comfortable, intimate, like a couple who belonged together. "The hotel meetings are usually Tuesday and Thursday afternoons," Ray continued. "Always the same place, the Meridian downtown. He has a corporate account there. Very discreet, very professional." "How often?" "Twice a week, sometimes 3 times, plus dinners, drinks, weekend meetings when you're out of town or working late." Ray pulled out a calendar marked with red X's. "I've documented 47 separate encounters over the past 6 months. 47 times. 47 times my wife had chosen to be with another man instead of coming home to me." The number was staggering. "Phone records show daily contact," Ray went on. "Text messages, calls, sometimes for hours at a time, and the financial trail is extensive. He's been paying for everything. Hotels, dinners, gifts. There's a jewelry purchase from Tiffany last month for $3,000. I thought about the new necklace Maggie had been wearing lately, the one she'd said was a gift from her sister. Another lie in an apparently endless series of lies. "What about Sydney?" I asked. "That's more recent. The dinner date started 3 weeks ago. He's taken her out 5 times, always to high-end restaurants, always with expensive gifts afterward. Shopping trips, concert tickets, that kind of thing. Is he—" I couldn't finish the question. "No," Ray said firmly. "Nothing inappropriate with your daughter, but he's definitely cultivating her, making himself important in her life. My guess is he's trying to ensure she'll support the relationship when it comes out in the open." When? Not if. Ray was assuming this was heading toward Maggie leaving me for Brett, not just an affair she'd eventually end. "There's something else," Ray said, pulling out another set of photographs. "Your wife has been apartment hunting." The photos showed Maggie looking at expensive downtown condos, always with Brett at her side. In one image, she was signing what looked like paperwork while Brett watched with his arm around her shoulders. "She put a deposit down on a place in Harbor View last week," Ray said. 2-bedroom, Harbor View, $4,500 a month. The lease starts May 1st. May 1st was 6 weeks away. Maggie was planning to leave me in 6 weeks, and she hadn't said a word about it. Does she know you know? Ray asked. I don't think so. I haven't confronted her yet. Good. That gives you time to plan your response. What are you thinking? I stared at the photographs spread across the table. Evidence of my wife's betrayal, my daughter's manipulation, my own complete failure as a husband and father. What was I thinking? I was thinking that I'd been living in a fantasy for the past 6 months, maybe longer. I was thinking that the woman I'd been married to for 22 years was a stranger. I was thinking that I was tired of being the last to know about my own life. I want to confront them, I said. All of them. But not here, not privately. I want it to be public, where they can't lie or manipulate the situation. Ray raised an eyebrow. That's risky. Could backfire, make you look like the bad guy. I am the bad guy, I said. At least that's how they see me. The boring husband, the disappointing father, the obstacle standing in the way of their happiness. If I'm going to be the villain in their story, I might as well embrace the role. What did you have in mind? I'd been thinking about this since yesterday, turning over different scenarios in my head. Brett's running for district attorney, right? I saw the signs around town. Yeah, election's in November. He's the front runner. Then he'll be at the Chamber of Commerce dinner next Friday. It's the biggest political event of the year in this town. Everyone will be there. Business leaders, lawyers, judges, reporters. Ray was starting to smile. You want to confront him there, in front of everyone? I want to give a toast, I said, to my wife and her boyfriend and my daughter's new father figure. I want to thank them all publicly for showing me exactly where I stand. That's either brilliant or insane, Ray said. Maybe both. Probably both, I agreed. But I'm tired of being the victim in this story. It's time to take control of the narrative. We spent the next hour planning the details. Ray would continue monitoring their activities, looking for any last-minute changes that might affect my plans. I would buy tickets to the chamber dinner and prepare my remarks. Most importantly, I would continue acting normal at home, giving Maggie no reason to suspect that I knew about her plans. That evening, I sat at the dinner table with my wife and daughter, making small talk about work and school while internally rehearsing what I was going to say to them in 6 days. Maggie seemed relaxed, almost cheerful, probably because she thought she was successfully managing her double life. Sydney was distracted, texting someone, probably Brett, based on the way she smiled at her phone. How's work going? I asked Maggie. Good, she said, not looking up from her salad. Busy, but good. The Patterson case is finally wrapping up, which means I'll have more time for other things. Other things, like moving in with her boyfriend. That's great, I said. Maybe we can plan something special, a vacation, or just a nice dinner out. She glanced up at me with a look of mild surprise, as if the idea of spending time together was foreign to her. Maybe, she said non-committally. We'll see how things go. Sydney looked up from her phone. Brett asked if I wanted to go to some political dinner with him next Friday. He said it would be good networking for me, meeting all the important people in town. My heart started beating faster. I hadn't expected Sydney to be there, but it actually made the situation better, more dramatic, more complete. That sounds like a great opportunity, I said. I'll probably be there too, the Chamber of Commerce dinner, right? My company usually buys a table. Oh, Sydney said, looking less enthusiastic. I didn't know you'd be there. Don't worry, I said with a smile. I won't embarrass you. I'll probably just sit quietly in the back and eat my chicken dinner. Maggie was watching this exchange with a frown. You're going to the chamber dinner? You hate those events. I do, I agreed. But I've been thinking about what Sydney said the other day, about being more exciting, more engaged with the community. Maybe it's time for me to step out of my comfort zone. That's great, Dad, Sydney said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. After dinner, I helped Maggie clean up the dishes, something I'd always done, though she'd stopped thanking me for it years ago. Are you feeling okay? She asked as we loaded the dishwasher. You seem different lately. Different how? I don't know. More present, I guess, more engaged. I almost laughed. I was more engaged because I finally understood what I was dealing with. For months, I'd been fighting a battle I didn't even know I was in. Now, at least, I knew who the enemy was. Maybe I'm finally growing up, I said. She looked at me strangely but didn't pursue it. Later that evening, I heard her on the phone in the bedroom, speaking in the low, intimate tones I remembered from when we were dating. She was talking to Brett, probably telling him about my plans to attend the dinner, maybe expressing concern about having me there. Let her be concerned. In 6 days, all of our secrets would be out in the open, and we could finally stop pretending to be a happy family. I spent the rest of the week preparing my remarks and watching my wife and daughter prepare for their new life without me. Maggie worked late every night, probably coordinating her move with Brett. Sydney spent hours shopping for the perfect dress for the chamber dinner, excited about her debut in Brett's sophisticated world. Neither of them seemed to consider how I might feel about being excluded from their plans, about being treated like a minor character in my own life story. That was about to change. The Chamber of Commerce dinner was held at the Grandview Country Club, the kind of place where deals were made over 18-year-old scotch and political careers were launched with carefully crafted speeches. I arrived early, wearing my best suit and a confidence I'd borrowed from some version of myself I was still getting to know. Ray had texted me an hour earlier. "They're all here. Your wife, daughter, and Brett are at table 12. You're at table 15, perfect positioning. Good luck." I found my table and introduced myself to my dinner companions, local business owners I'd worked with over the years, people who knew me as the quiet architect who designed their buildings and never caused any drama. They seemed surprised to see me at such a high-profile event. "David," called Jim Patterson, who owned 3 shopping centers I'd designed. "Didn't expect to see you here. Not really your scene, is it?" "I'm full of surprises tonight, Jim," I said, accepting a glass of wine from the server. From my seat, I had a clear view of table 12. Maggie looked stunning in a black cocktail dress I'd never seen before, probably another gift from Brett. Sydney was radiant in navy blue, clearly thrilled to be part of such an elegant event. And Brett, in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looked every inch the successful politician, working the room with practiced charm. They looked like a family, a better family than the one I'd been part of for the past 20 years. The dinner progressed through its predictable stages: cocktails, salad, rubber chicken, and increasingly alcohol-fueled networking. I watched Brett make his rounds, shaking hands with judges and prosecutors, kissing the cheeks of wealthy donors' wives, building the coalition that would carry him to victory in November. Finally, after the dessert plates were cleared, the evening's master of ceremonies took the microphone. Judge Patricia Williams was a formidable woman in her 60s, someone who'd presided over half the major cases in the county for the past 2 decades. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "before we hear from our keynote speaker, we have a few special presentations and acknowledgments." This was my moment. I'd spoken to Judge Williams earlier, explaining that I wanted to make a brief toast to some special people in my life. She'd seemed charmed by the idea, the quiet architect finally coming out of his shell. I stood up and walked to the microphone, feeling the eyes of 300 people on me. At table 12, I saw Maggie's face go white. Sydney looked confused, and Brett had the expression of a man who just realized he might be in trouble. "Good evening," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. "For those who don't know me, I'm David Mitchell. I design the buildings where many of you work and shop, though I'm usually too boring to attend events like this." A few polite chuckles from the audience. "But tonight is special," I continued, "because I want to publicly acknowledge some people who have changed my life in ways I never could have imagined." I turned slightly, making sure I had a clear view of table 12. "First, I want to thank my wife of 22 years, Maggie Mitchell." I raised my wine glass toward their table. "Maggie is a paralegal at Brennan & Associates, and she's taught me so much about dedication and commitment. For the past 6 months, she's been working incredibly hard on a very special project, one that requires her to spend time at the Meridian Hotel twice a week, sometimes 3 times, always on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons." The room was getting quieter. People were starting to sense that this wasn't a typical grateful husband speech. "Maggie's project has required tremendous sacrifice," I went on. "She's had to lie about working late, create fake business trips, even tell me that beautiful Tiffany necklace she's wearing was a gift from her sister. The dedication she's shown to this project is truly inspiring." At table 12, Maggie was gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Brett had gone very still, the politician's smile frozen on his face. "I also want to thank my 19-year-old daughter, Sydney," I continued. "Sydney has taught me about the importance of honesty in family relationships. Just last week, she looked me in the eye and told me I was boring, that I wasn't exciting like other men she knew, that I didn't make her mother smile the way these other men do. I appreciate that kind of direct feedback." Sydney was staring at me in horror, finally understanding what was happening. "And finally," I said, turning to look directly at Brett, "I want to thank Brett Hoffman, our candidate for district attorney. Brett has shown me what true generosity looks like. He's been so kind to my family, taking my wife to expensive hotels, buying her jewelry, even apartment hunting with her for a lovely place in Harbor View with a May 1st lease date." The room was dead silent now. 300 people were hanging on every word, watching a man systematically destroy his own life in public. Brett has also been incredibly generous with my daughter, I continued, taking her to expensive restaurants, buying her gifts, helping her network with important people. He's been working so hard to replace me in my own family that I thought he deserved some public recognition for his efforts. I raised my glass higher. So here's to Maggie, Sydney, and Brett, 3 people who have shown me exactly where I stand in my own life. Thank you for finally being honest with me, even if it took a private investigator and 47 documented hotel visits to get the full picture. I drained my wine glass and set it down on the podium. Enjoy your new life together. I hope it brings you all the happiness you've been looking for. Then I walked away from the microphone, through the stunned crowd, and out of the ballroom. Behind me, I could hear the explosion beginning, voices rising, chairs scraping, the sound of a scandal erupting in real time. Someone was calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I'd said everything I needed to say. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for a few minutes, my hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. My phone was already buzzing with text messages, but I ignored them. There would be time later to deal with the aftermath. For now, I just sat in the darkness, feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of finally telling the truth. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Sydney. "Dad," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I suspected, but I didn't really know." "It's okay," I said. "No, it's not okay. What I said to you, the way I've been acting." "God, Dad, everyone's talking about what just happened." Brett left. He just walked out without saying anything. "And Mom is... Your mother is what?" "She's crying. She's sitting in the bathroom crying, and all these people keep coming up to me asking questions, and I don't know what to say." I felt a pang of sympathy for my daughter, caught in the middle of a situation she hadn't created. "Go home, Sydney," I said. "Take your mother home. We'll talk tomorrow." "Are you coming home?" I looked at the country club, where the lights were still blazing and the scandal was still unfolding. "Not tonight. Maybe not for a while." "Dad, I'm really sorry. About everything. About what I said, about not seeing what was happening, about choosing him over you. I was wrong." "You weren't wrong about me being boring," I said. "But maybe boring isn't the worst thing to be." After I hung up, I drove to a hotel across town. Not the Meridian, somewhere Maggie had never been with Brett. I checked in, ordered room service, and finally looked at the text messages that had been piling up. Most were from people who'd been at the dinner, expressing shock, sympathy, or morbid curiosity. But one was from Ray, the private investigator. "Saw the news coverage. Well played. Call me tomorrow. We need to talk about next steps." News coverage. I turned on the local news and found myself watching footage from outside the country club with a reporter breathlessly describing a shocking public confrontation that has rocked the local legal and political community. They showed a brief clip of Brett leaving the hotel, stone-faced and refusing to answer questions. Then a longer segment about how this might affect his campaign for district attorney. I turned off the TV and lay back on the hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. In the space of 10 minutes, I'd ended my marriage, destroyed a political campaign, and probably made myself the most talked-about person in town. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it just felt like the end of everything I'd spent 22 years building. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe some things needed to end before new things could begin. Tomorrow, I'd start figuring out what came next. Tonight, for the first time in months, I was going to sleep without wondering what lies my wife was telling or what secrets my family was keeping. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I stood.